Okay, welcome everybody to the Chappaqua Central School District Board of Education meeting for Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. Can I have a motion to open the meeting at 6 o'clock?
I'll move.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Please stand for the pledge. Okay, so we just got done with the audit committee meeting, and it's now time for the president's report. As I've been doing most meetings, I like to start with some gratitude, and I'm going to do that again tonight until people get too tired of it. I want to express my gratitude to everybody that was involved in pulling off a terrific homecoming last Friday. It was an awesome event. All kinds of sports happening at all ages in the afternoon and the evening. We had modified sports, we had Titans, we had cheerleaders, we had football players, and then we also had the PTA Diversity, Race, and Belonging Committee do the fall family gathering, which was great for food and music, a bunch of stuff for people to enjoy. I just think it's a really important moment every time we get the chance to get all families on the Greeley campus so that everybody's sort of sharing in the facilities, and just really appreciate everybody that came together to make that event happen. That's the gratitude for today. Thank you. And then on the agenda, we've got 1.1.1, which is Board of Education Governance Handbook. So it's common practice for boards of education to have a handbook that outlines the roles and responsibilities of the board. It's supposed to be a helpful resource for everybody in the community to understand what the board's job is and to help us do our job better. As it turns out, up until this summer, Chappaqua never had one. And so thankfully this summer, some of us, with a lot of help from Dr. Ackerman, have created a draft handbook. And I believe we've made that handbook available on the website. Is that true?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to push it out in the week.
You're going to put it in the week. Okay,
Yeah.
so on Sunday, an email will come out. And in there will be a link for those who would like to take a look at the Board of Education's handbook. And we would love to get your feedback about it. This is just a draft. And we're, of course, interested in people's input to make it better. And at a future meeting, we'll look to pass it by resolution and make it part of our everyday practice here. And then Monday and Tuesday, I want to let the community know that the board will be going on its fall retreat. This is a rare opportunity where we as a board can engage with each other outside of the mechanics of public meetings and executive sessions and all of that, and really spend time with each other. We're going to put some focus on communication and effective collaboration this time at the retreat. And I know we're all looking forward to doing that. And I think that's about it. Tonight we're going to have, in addition to learning a lot about busing and the future of busing, we're going to have a quick readout of the audit that we just learned in a lot more detail. And then it's a pretty standard agenda tonight. So over to you, Dr. Ackerman.
Right. I just, thank you, Ryan. I just want to highlight two pieces of the agenda tonight for the board's consideration. The first is our SRO at the middle level has been promoted. And so we're very happy for him, but we have a vacancy at the middle school. So Josh led the interview process, and I'd just like him to introduce Linnell to the board members who weren't on the selection committee, because this resolution is on the agenda tonight for your consideration.
Sure. So Linnell Jones, she's been NCPD police officer. She impressed our committee as she is getting her PhD in ethical leadership right now. And she has a youth coach. She's a mentor. She is a substitute teacher. She has a nonprofit organization that she runs. She's a substance and alcohol abuse counselor. She impressed our committee with everything about her that she embodies. She understands the culture of our school. She's been a substitute SRO in our schools previously, and we are proud to appoint her as our middle school SRO.
Thank you, Josh. And then if you could please give a board an update over where we are with in terms of our lockdown system after the alarm went off last week.
Sure,
at
sure.
Greeley.
Yeah, and I think this update includes our camera system, alarm system, fire system, and lockdown system. We've been doing weekly tests of them. Stratagem, the company that has installed our locks and our lockdown system, we've met with multiple times over the past few weeks to determine exactly how our system works, what the configuration of our system is, what they've programmed into our system. And I've dug deep into our system. And then as part of that now, we are going to be doing an independent audit with a company, Day Automation, of all of those systems. And that's going to start next week. And we're going to start with doing interior walks with it. We're going to review our security procedures. We're going to dig into the system with them. They also do similar work. So they're an independent company that's going to advise us on what changes, if any, need to be made to our system. And then we're going to work with them and Stratagem with those improvements. And we'll come back together once we have a report from them of the full picture of our safety and security. They've already given us some feedback that the systems that we have are extremely strong. And they just want to make sure that there's redundancies built into our system and that everything is programmed 100% correctly. It's really the main components of it.
So our plan is to once the audit is issued, we'll schedule a work session with you and the auditor, and we'll talk about maybe it would make sense for Stratagem to be at that meeting as well. And then just in terms of upcoming events, we have our open house tomorrow here at Greeley. Next week is our open house at the middle school. We do have 2 days off next week for Rosh Hashanah. And then our next meeting is October 9th. And so at this point, we'd like to move into the bus presentation because I know that this is pretty comprehensive. It's very different than any study we've had done before. I want to thank Seth. I think I saw him walk in here, Corwin, who is our president of Chappaqua Transportation. So thanks for being here, Seth. And Josh, would you like to introduce Chris? And then I'm going to bring the clicker over to him.
Sure. So Chris is from Transportation Advisory Services. He and his team have been working with us for about the last 5 months in doing a route study of all of our buses, understanding the landscape of busing in Chappaqua for both school and field trips and sports, and understanding the laws and rules and regulations around electric busing and the mandate from the state for that, and is able to put together a comprehensive study and presentation for us tonight. This is the start of the work that we're going to be doing. I fully anticipate that after this evening's presentation, we are then going to have to make some decisions and do further work and put a timeline together and funding programs together in order to meet that 2035 goal of full electric busing. And Chris has done this work in other school districts and started building bus garages in other school districts and has already started implementing electric busing in other school districts and put plans together for them.
Thanks a lot, Josh. Yeah, as Josh said, my name is Christopher Wojciechowski with TAS. So Transportation Advisory Services, we've been around since 1987. Obviously, I have not been there the entire time, but we are the nation's largest dedicated. We are the nation's largest dedicated transportation consulting firm. We don't do anything else. We don't sell software. We don't recommend only specific buses, and we're a third-party independent consulting firm. And that's one of the things we'd like to pride ourselves on, and we feel like is a kind of a selling feature. We have worked with over 550 clients. We've worked with pretty much most of upstate New York. You guys, I don't know if you consider yourself upstate or not, but some people would, but I'm not going to say that. But we've worked with everywhere from Long Island all the way over to Buffalo. So we have worked well across the state. We're well versed in a lot of the state laws, regulations, ways to utilize the resources the state provides to your best benefit.
So Chris, before you dive into the presentation, just for people who maybe aren't aware that there has been legislation that's been passed for all school districts in the state to transition to electric buses or zero emission buses by 2023. 2033 with an extension if we'd like to apply for it.
Yeah.
And then there's like a transition process that needs to begin by 2027. And so there's been a lot of advocacy around the state from public schools that this unfunded mandate is going to be very challenging for many of us to meet because of the complexities associated with powering the buses, the location of where the buses are going to be stored. Some school districts own their fleets, others like us contract out. So there's a lot of moving pieces, but what has been very clear from our representatives is that this is going to happen. And so I think that it made sense for us to partner, even though seems like it's far away, it's really not. And so we need to be thinking about now how we're going to make this happen collectively for the district. And so I just kind of wanted to make sure everyone had the same information. Chris, did you want to add anything to that?
Perfect. No, that's exactly what I was gonna jump on next. So yeah,
Okay.
the deadline for fully transitioning all of your current fleet is that 2035 deadline. It's a July 1, so it's a fiscal year start for you guys. All of your buses need to be fully zero emission. As of right now, that's electric, but
It could change to something
future
else.
technologies could bring out different possible avenues. The 2027 deadline, you're no longer able to buy, they call them ICE vehicles, but basically propane, diesel, gasoline, any of those types of vehicles, you're no longer able to purchase those after 2027. There is something in the works about a 2-year waiver if you are making significant progress towards the goal of transitioning your fleet. And there's a potential 2-year waiver that kind of comes with that. That's something that we're staying on top of, and we'll definitely let Josh and the rest of the team here know if that goes through. This study may qualify you for that, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can sit on your hands. We've known a lot of districts that have started this process back in 2019, and they only have about 8 or 9 buses out of their 100 or so fleet. So it does take a lot of time to build up the infrastructure, and to secure vehicles, to secure charging equipment, troubleshoot a lot of issues that kind of go along the way. And we'll touch on some of those as we kind of go through here. We do definitely want to take a look at some of the operational concerns that face not just Chappaqua, but every district. We started out by doing a route analysis. We took a look at all of your routes to do a feasibility. Can we make all of these routes electric? What is needed to make that happen? We also took a look at your current bus fleet and try to figure out what a fleet would look like in 2035. We definitely like to look at the end and kind of work our way backwards so we know what targets we have to meet. The big thing for you guys is definitely going to be infrastructure. Figuring out a plan that works for both you guys and your contractor. We want to take a look a little bit at your charger selection based on some of the analysis that we do. What chargers do you need to put at your facility, and how long do those buses need to charge to get to an adequate percentage to make sure that they complete all of their runs, and also financial portion. That's a big piece, especially for this district. You guys do not get the state aid that a lot of districts get. And we'll talk a little bit more about funding and grants and some obstacles that you'll have to overcome. I do want to point out about 50% of New York State is contracted out. So you guys aren't alone in the state when it comes to contracting out your services. Half the districts are currently doing that, and they're facing similar challenges in different ways that you need to kind of navigate the transition from ICE vehicles to fully zero emission. So we started with a route analysis. Currently, you guys have 50 route buses. That means buses that are taking kids from home to school and back home again. Those buses, we took a look at the entire fleet, all of the runs that they do in the morning and the afternoon. That ranges between 2 and 45 miles per day. It is way less than a lot of districts have. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get to more of the down in the geography section here. In between your runs, you will have about 4 to 5 hours to charge midday if you need to on some of those longer runs that are closer to the 40, 45 mile hour per day. You do have some athletic runs that are quite a bit of a distance. Chappaqua is not flat. And you guys have to go to a lot of different districts around. And so geography and some mountainous terrain definitely come into play, especially when we get into the winter months. We do encourage you guys to constantly be updating your runs based on your current ridership. There are definitely some improvements that could be made currently that we detailed out a little bit in the report, where there's different strategies that can be implemented from a routing perspective. And being efficient from a routing perspective is going to be key when you get to electric buses, because the cost difference between an ICE vehicle and an electric bus, you're looking at 2.5 to 3 times the current cost. And that's new buses to new buses, not new buses to buy and use. So that's definitely something we're going to take a look at. One of the things to look at about the geography, like I said, Chappaqua is not flat. There are some challenges when it comes to mountainous terrain, but you guys are only 19 square miles about, which is very doable when it comes to electrification as far as how far your buses have to travel. There are typically 3 main issues that districts face. One is securing a facility and having the infrastructure required. That's probably going to be the top line item for you guys. The other thing is, can our buses take our kids to school and get them home? You guys are actually in a really good spot when it comes to that as of right now, just because of the your current the distances that your buses are currently traveling. And the other one is just finding adequate power for the facility. Right now, you guys don't have that, but you do have a really good utility provider that has been on top of it, has been moving forward. There are lots of other utilities in the state that are dragging their feet. You guys are not in that situation. So out of the 3 biggest hurdles, you guys really only have one of those 3 hurdles. So there is some optimism coming from this. When we take a look at the bus specifications, we want to take a look at a bunch of different factors. We want to take a look at your routes. What do your routes currently look like? What does that look like when we replace them with electric vehicles? Are we going in 1-to-1? Are we keeping the small vans, the shorter buses, or are we going to try to leverage more larger buses? Your existing fleet is 96 buses, which is a significant larger percentage than your current fleet. A lot of that is because you guys have a lot of your buses are a lot older, more maintenance is required, higher costs. There can be some efficiencies by transitioning to electric, but it does require excellent maintenance team and being really on top of your fleet replacement program moving forward. When we take a look at the capacities of the buses, are we going to have 66 passenger buses? Are we going to mix that in with some wheelchair buses? It's probably going to be a mixture. One of the things that we do want to point out, there are some road restrictions in the district where your big buses currently cannot go on some of your current roads. So there is going to be a need for some of those smaller buses with the single axle instead of the double. How far do you want these buses to go? There are some options in buses where you can get extended batteries. How many of those buses do we really need? In which scenario do we want to implement those? How much time do you have to charge in between? Like we said, about 4 to 5 hours in between, and you also have quite a substantial amount of time overnight. We really want to replace your current vehicles just in time to meet some of the deadlines imposed by New York State, with the understanding that there are going to be obstacles and there's a timeline coming up with it. I like bar graphs. One of the things we like to do is we like to not only talk about bringing in your electric vehicles, but when do you start phasing out your vehicles? As you can see in 2035, we have a very large removal of diesel vehicles. That would be the remaining of your vehicles. At the end of your life, you're going to have 15 large buses still, and you're going to have, for the next 10, 11 years, you're going to have large buses to do your athletics. We really think that athletics is going to be the last piece of the puzzle that you guys kind of transition to zero emission. So that's why we're really hanging on to some of those diesel those larger diesels into the end of the life. As you can kind of see, we're starting to remove some buses earlier on in the process. It's probably something that Seth and his team was doing yearly anyway. But we do want you to start thinking about adding some electric buses once we get to 2028. And the reason for that being is we like to think of electrification into kind of 3 tiers. The first tier and bringing on new buses is really kind of that exploratory. How is this all going to work? What happens in certain situations when the bus breaks down, or if the battery dies, or the charger isn't getting the bus up to full charge? There's a lot of different operational and different component things that can fail. And it's something that you guys will work together through throughout the next decade or so. Moving on here, we do want to talk a little bit about charger selection. Since your buses don't need to go very long distances when they're servicing the school district, we're looking at about 50 level 2 chargers, which are 19.2 kilowatt per hour chargers. If you plug in a bus that's pretty much depleted at the end of the school day, you can plug it in and by the morning it'll be fully charged, ready to go for the full next day. We do want you guys to consider 4 DC fast chargers. Those are the chargers that you're really going to want to use in the middle of the day, that are going to get your buses that are really depleted, maybe at that 20-30%, and get them up to that 95-100% range for your afternoon charging. Like I said, midday charging is not really needed from the vast majority of your buses. Most of the buses are advertised as they can go 120 miles. We usually like to say take about 40% of what they say they can do is what real world application tends to be in the worst case scenario. So instead of 120, you're looking at more like 50 miles per day on the coldest day in January when there's snow, with your geography and everything like that. Moving on, infrastructure is going to be a huge undertaking. We took a look at the current layout and the current parking. Seth, I do not know how you get all of those buses in there. You and your team do an excellent job. The parking solution they have is mind-boggling. I've been to many districts. I've never seen anything like it. Really great utilization of the space. With that being said, the buses don't have anywhere to currently charge. So the current location doesn't kind of meet the long-term goals that are needed. There would be a lot of utility upgrades. The current facility doesn't seem feasible for a long-term solution for the district. But we do want to, in a new facility or new location, we want to take a look at how is it going to be laid out? Where are our bus drivers going to be trained and everything like that? What are the parking solutions for our buses? Do we want to have them all pull into their charging stations? Do we want anyone backing out? Utility upgrades, working with the utility to make sure that you have the appropriate power and when you need it. Constantly communicating with them is very crucial. Understanding what your charging needs are. You're not going to need 54 chargers in 2028 when you get your first bus or two. That's going to be a phased in kind of approach as well as phasing in the buses. Where do you want to put your chargers, and also taking into account for additional fire and safety equipment on site to put out any potential electrical fires, working with your local fire departments to make sure that they know how to put out these types of fires in the rare case that it does happen. I do like to point out that the chance of an electric vehicle catching fire is about the same, if not a little bit less, than a diesel or gasoline bus catching fire. So we don't want to the risk to go unmentioned, but also we don't want to blow it out of proportion. So what I did is we built up an infrastructure plan with 3 options we think for the district. One is a very hands-off approach. You ask your contractor, go secure your own facility, deal with all the infrastructure updates on your own. We'll work with you as far as scheduling and what we can, but we want to take a hands-off approach. The second option is to acquire property, build a bus garage where the contractor may operate out of. And that is something that you would go to a current facility off school property, purchase the property, and put all the necessary infrastructure in place. And option 3 is to actually look on school grounds, and do some of the similar options as option 2, where you're building your own bus garage. I do really like the idea of school districts in New York, especially as we're transitioning to electrification, to have and own their own transportation facility. We do want to make sure that there is longevity for you guys. And we do believe it will be in your best interest long-term to make sure that you have control, and you can, what we like to think of a lot about risk when we're talking about different aspects. And if the district can own some of the risk, as far as owning the risk of the cost of electricity, or owning the risk of maintaining the facility and keeping that up to date, we definitely think that's in your best interest long term, where we can keep costs manageable. You can employ your own efficiencies as you go through. From a financial perspective, right now you guys are getting 6.5% transportation aid, which is the lowest in the possible that the state can give you. So there's not a lot of help coming from the state in that way. One of the things that you can look at is leasing vehicles versus purchasing, or asking your contractor to purchase and maintain that risk and those costs. You can take a look at a lot of different grants. Fortunately or unfortunately for the district, most of the grants so far have been for what they consider disadvantaged communities. And between 40 and 60% of the weighting of the RFPs for those grants were based on that disadvantaged community standards that you guys would receive 0 points for. And so right now there's not a lot of options as far as the grants that have come through. There are some options through NYSERDA and through the Environmental Bond Act that got passed last November. Those funds are being utilized, and it's not as it's being dispersed more fairly throughout the district, and not necessarily just targeting disadvantaged communities, if that makes sense. Currently, buses, the costs of a new electric bus, large bus, if you put GPSs, you have all the cameras, if you have all of the safety features on the bus, you're looking at between $505,000 and $515,000. That's the all-in cost. Where I know that you guys are not currently buying new buses consistently, but if you bought a diesel or gasoline vehicle, you're probably looking in the $215,000 with all of those same features and things like that. When we take a look at your infrastructure costs,
That price with the battery?
yes. That's going through a vendor and getting the best possible rate for large quantities of buses, or a large budget commitment long term. And some of the infrastructure costs we're estimating for you guys between $50,000 and $60,000 per bus in infrastructure costs. So we want to make sure that we're being as diligent as we can with some of the costs and getting you guys as much funding as we can with the stipulations that we spoke to before.
For the infrastructure costs, are you bringing like
Sorry.
having a charger for each bus, that's another 50 to 60,000?
So the charger, getting the appropriate utilities in from Con Ed, bringing the facility up to kind of the appropriate charging level. And it covers a wide variety of things, not just like, here's a charger. There's more that goes into it than just that. that is the end of the presentation. Usually it's a lot more interactive, and I apologize if I rambled, but I definitely want to field as many questions and open it up to discussion if possible.
We could work our way around. Looks like Hillary's raring to go. What do you got?
I have like 400 questions.
Chris?
So, like, and a lot of them are related, so I'm just gonna kind of read them and
Yep.
then maybe.
For sure.
So, I come to these questions also having, we only drive electric vehicles. So I'm very much pro this, but also know some of the problems here. The first being, and this is, I mean, for New York State, we don't even have this bad, but like cold weather, right? Like it's a really, and I know you spoke to that when you
Yep.
said the coldest day in January, but we're talking about really disparate, you know, the times these buses would run the best, our kids aren't in school. But, so I guess really where I'm struggling looking at this whole thing is our setup in terms of both our physical setup and our structure. And I ask these questions with no disrespect to staff at all, but it seems weird, for lack of a better word, for us to be buying the buses, potentially building a facility to charge the buses and house the buses, own the buses, but not be the ones running the buses. Like, I wonder if we're gonna make this conversion, which we obviously are in whatever timeline or structure that means, we need to be looking at transportation more globally and thinking about, does it make more sense to just take it on in-house? And I guess then some of my other questions are other bus companies, where you say like 50% of school districts are contracting, when other districts are contracting with bus companies, are the districts buying the buses or are the bus companies buying the buses? And then, because right now you're talking about our buses, but right now we don't have buses. Like, they're Seth's buses, they're not our buses. And then my other two probably more concrete questions are, what happens, we lose power around here like a lot, and so what happens if we lose power? Like, is there a backup plan? Should we also need to be budgeting for generators? Like, it's one thing if the power goes out overnight, which I would say is our more common occurrence, but then we're like, can't open school the next day, but what if the power goes out midday and that's not an issue when we're just bringing kids home? And I know these are kind of annoying questions, and I really ask them wanting to make this transition, but not wanting to like find ourselves with a tree down and suddenly our kids can't go home. And also, when you mentioned potentially acquiring land and building a bus depot, which I think would have to be a realistic thing to consider because there's no way to charge buses where they are now. Who's buying that, right? Like in this hybrid model we have right now where we would own the buses but wouldn't be running the buses, like are we now buying land in Chappaqua? Because that's probably not feasible.
Yeah.
So that's my laundry list of questions at the moment.
I definitely want to start out with saying, as far as contracting now, we see a wide variety of services throughout the state. Some districts, like yourself, it's fully hands-off, the contractor handles everything. There are situations where the contractor is just providing the labor, just the drivers. Sometimes they're providing the drivers and the buses, but not the internal staff. Sometimes the district just provides a facility. So we see a wide variety of things. One of the reasons we kind of encourage the owning as many of the pieces as possible is once you start to put infrastructure in a location, it becomes very hard for competition to be any competition if there were to be going out to bid at any point or RFP or anything like that. If you have $2 million on school property, as opposed to a third-party vendor owning that $2 million of property and infrastructure and things like that, you're not going to have anyone realistically come in and keep pricing fair. And usually competition is the way that you keep pricing fair long term. If you have a facility, you kind of take away a large portion of that. As far as owning the buses versus the contractor owning the buses, if you own the bus, you can go for a lot longer period of time for the contract than if someone comes in and I think Seth's doing a great job and his team's doing a great job. This is nothing against Seth. If Seth decides like, hey, I want to retire and I'm done, what happens then? And like, I don't mean that in any way.
I think another way to look at it is, and it's a little bit different, but almost the same in a lot of ways. Airmark comes in and uses our facilities to facilitate food services here. So there are models where we could have the facilities and you can hire a company to facilitate transportation for you. So that's something that we would need to talk about as a potential option. I ran a school district where we ran transportation, and so there's benefits to that, but there's also some serious benefits in contracting out and having someone with real expertise, hiring staff, supervising staff, making sure that the buses are operating in the appropriate way. Like, that's a level of service that you get by contracting out that's hard to bring in-house, just from my own experience.
Yeah, we have done studies taking a look at the difference between outsourcing and insourcing, and the arrangement that you guys have today is very favorable. We think compared to some of the rates around the area, you guys are in very fair shape. So I think the level of service kind of is meeting your standards as well.
More questions?
A few more. And again, we're obviously doing this, right? New York State has mandated, so we're going to make it happen. And I guess since it's all new to all of us, we're just sort of taking in all the information and trying to weigh all of the options to see what's going to be the best for us. And I guess some of my questions came down to the midday charging, which then you said later on doesn't necessarily need it for all buses. Because I was thinking, what if there's an emergency in the middle of the day and the buses have to pick up earlier than usual and they haven't gotten their 4 or 5 hour charge, but then you said it wasn't usually needed. And I also read in your report about cutting down the amount of runs, because not necessarily every kid who's allotted to ride the bus is actually riding the bus. Mm-hmm. And I think in the report you said something in like the 80% range. You could assume that like 80% of the kids are going to ride it, but not all the kids. And my question is, maybe that's true at the high school level or at certain runs, but what if family situations change? What if kids want to ride the bus? What if it's a snow day and we're sending everyone home early on the buses? And I would want every child who could possibly need a seat on the bus to have that option. And I don't think we'd ever want to be in a position where we're like, oh, we only thought 80% of the kids were going to take the bus home today, so you 3 kids can't come on. Like,
right, and that's something that we take a look at in every district. And what is your ratio of scheduled riders to actual riders, and then use that to try to budget, okay, let's try to get close to 85%. Most districts we go into, when we take a look at usable capacity, if we say 66 passenger bus, you're not fitting 66 high schoolers on that bus. At max, you're fitting 44. So we take a look at usable capacity. We want you to aim for 85%. Across the state, we're seeing between districts that are doing a really good job are in that 50 to 60% range, and the districts that are failing and not doing as good of a job are in the 20 to 30% range. So we're not saying pack the bus necessarily, but we want you to just be mindful that you have enough room on or that you're not bringing empty buses to school in the morning. So like finding a happy medium between the two, and also having a contingency plan. If you need to evacuate the high school, you have the vehicles that are able to do that immediately. So it's a give and take. And yeah, most of your buses are servicing, you're looking at 10 to 20 miles per day. So if you did have an emergency dismissal obviously there would need to be an emergency dismissal contingency plan based on buses and charging and things like that. But it's just something that you'll have to work through operationally and procedurally.
yeah, I mean, maybe theoretically we could poll our families and people could opt out of the busing if they never were going to use it. Their kids, what do you mean you can't?
This is actually something on that whole resolutions book. Right now, you're not actually allowed to do that. It's a resolution that NYSBA's considering doing now.
Got it.
To allow districts to do it, but right now you can't.
Okay.
So we do work in other states, and they allow similar things. if it ever becomes possible, we would recommend an opt-in model versus an opt-out. If you have an opt-out option, you might have 6 or 7 parents in the entire district that opt out. So it doesn't provide you as much benefit. So just something to consider.
No, definitely, we should
So-
talk about that for our resolutions. And then my last couple questions are, you know, we also are talking about our 5-year plan about potentially going to the Princeton model or redistricting or rezoning our middle schools, and that would obviously totally, completely change all of our bus routing. And so this was based on our current routes, correct?
So this is based on your current routing, and if you do make some changes, it sounds a little silly, but I would utilize the Parkway very much so as much as you can as a dividing line from a transportation perspective, and Seth can probably attest to this. It's a nightmare trying to get across the Parkway. And if you can utilize that as a partition, not having schools cross that as much as possible, that would be very beneficial, I think.
Great, thanks.
So you mentioned you guys work in 22 different states?
Yes.
Are there examples of states, look, I don't want my skepticism to come off and paint me as a anti-climate guy, but I am like skeptical that we could make this work inside of 10 years, so I guess we have no choice. But are there examples of states who are ahead of us in this process or not?
So, funny enough, the only electrification initiatives are pretty much in the Northeast. There are some in Colorado and some in California, but Maine has one, Connecticut has one, and New York. New York's the most aggressive one. New York is kind of the quote leader, and other
Okay.
states are going to
All
follow.
right, so then I guess my point is, are they baselining this with assumptions of the technology getting more efficient, or like, are they factoring that into play? Because at the moment, given the financing, you know, potentially having to acquire property, I mean, this is an exorbitant cost, and they are mandating this, and it looks like we are not on the top of the list to get aid for this.
No, I mean,
Right,
unfortunately, you're
so-
not. So one of the
Are
things.
they trying to bankrupt us? I'm being serious because this is a huge undertaking, and I think they're drawing a lot of assumptions that we're just gonna be able to snap our fingers and do this. And
Right.
when
And that's one of the things that we've been in Albany more often than I'd like to admit. But we want to make sure that we understand the benefits. We want to be pragmatic about this. We don't want to doom and gloom, but we also don't want to say, all right, everything's perfect.
Right.
One of the biggest things for you guys, again, from a financial perspective, is the infrastructure, but also you're going to have a lot of logistical challenges.
Right, it's not just the cost,
right.
it's actual, like, where are we putting it? I mean.
Right, and also acquiring the buses. If you can order an electric bus, but right now the lead time is about 18 months. So like, there are those logistical challenges.
But
Yeah.
2035, this is happening, there's no, I mean.
We've heard a lot of, we make the rules and you guys figure out how to follow them. Unfortunately, you guys are in way better shape than a lot of districts that we've gone to so far. We have a lot of districts that are pounding the table and not willing to move forward until they get, like, what are the repercussions if we don't do this? There's not been an
Well, what
answer
are
to.
they? Just like they would, like.
I mean,
those
probably
things-
like if you don't comply with any other aspects, removal of funding from different areas is probably the way that it would go, but there's nothing been said formally about that.
Right, and, you know, we take an oath to comply with the law, so we got to try to figure out how to do that. I also, you know, I feel like, because there's enough, like, advocacy around, like, we need some more help here, that they may present some financial models that might be outside of the norm of operating to help support us get this work done, because I mean, how do you go out to bond for this if the community doesn't want to pay for it, but you're still required to follow the law? So we're still waiting for some guidance around that.
The other thing is that the other thing that came out of this West Putt resolutions meeting is apparently, so one resolution in there also is to expand the definition of zero emissions buses so that hybrid buses would be acceptable because they're mostly zero emissions, so very, very low.
Zero-ish.
But I think that where that's coming from largely is some of the more spread out, rural freezing districts where they're really worried about the recharging in winter and not being able to cover the distance to get their kids home. So it may be that this is going to be a mandate, but the mandate might not look exactly like the mandate looks like today.
Yeah. I want to give Kaylee a chance to ask things as well. Do you have questions?
No, I'm okay, thank you.
You're good?
Yeah.
Okay. The only one that wasn't asked that I was curious about, and maybe it was in the report and my eyes glazed back into my head on the page where it was, but I'm curious about like the size of the buses and the staffing model kind of calculation. I'm wondering if you've looked at, the size of a 66 passenger bus is $500,000, but there's a lot of smaller vehicles that
Yeah.
would be quite a bit less, and those are capital purchase. Those are purchases, but then you've got to hire more drivers to deal with that. Have
Right.
you modeled that kind of a way of thinking about it? I was
More
looking
so,
at your route. You were saying reduce the routes, but I wondered, given that our routes are pretty reasonable,
Right.
what if we ran a fleet that was a lot more smaller buses?
So the cost of a smaller bus I believe you're looking at like 470 to 475, that
Oh,
range.
okay. So we're not really.
You're not really saving
really
much
bringing it down.
when you are looking at smaller vehicles. You are going to need to utilize some small vehicles just due to the parkway and
Sure.
traversing on that. And maybe that's something locally that you guys can work on. Maybe school buses get an exemption to utilize the parkway during the hours that they need to. That might actually be a unique way to approach it that really helps transportation, but also keeps the traffic flow reasonable at those hours in the morning and
Slower, yeah.
evening. But yeah, from a labor perspective, you're going to want to kind of keep.
Yeah.
the
I mean,
same
I can
amount of
understand the
buses, yeah.
long-term calculation for that wouldn't go well, but just to get
Yeah.
over the initial hump, I wondered if the progression.
Yeah, if you moved all to small buses, you'd probably need and I'm guessing probably about 75 route buses where you
Right.
have 50 today.
Yeah.
Just because you are utilizing those large buses in a large quantity of your district, but you are utilizing the smaller buses for out of district and on the parkway and in areas that the large buses just can't physically go to.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so what we should do next is probably this, if it's okay with everyone. I should send the report out to the community on Sunday, and then Josh needs to lead a task force on this. We have to start visiting other places that have these buses in operation, and we have to start to gather information. And then we need to collectively come back together and start to talk about what the process looks like in terms of making a decision and a timeline. Now that we have this report, which is excellent, by the way, so thank you very much. Now we can start to, I think, go out and do some site visits to gather some more information real time of districts that have done this successfully. I have to tell you, I don't know if I'm making an assumption just based on what I've heard from my colleagues, but there aren't many of them that have been able to transition as smoothly, even with the financial resources, because of the buses themselves. So I'm curious to maybe find a few districts that are having a positive experience, because I haven't heard of many that are right now. But that's just the reality of what happens when you're trying to take on something new. So, Chris, thank you.
Thanks.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's it? Okay, great. Okay, we have a round of applause. All right. So now I'd like to invite up our audit team. So Chris, we'll see you later. Thank you
Awesome.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Okay. All right. So something that's a little bit more in our wheelhouse, or audit. So
Welcome, Scott. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. I'll try to
Okay,
make this
so,
as electric a presentation as you just had.
Wow.
So Claudia and Scott are here from O'Connor's and Davies, and they're going to be presenting an overview of our audit. Now, our process in our district is we have an audit committee. We've already gone through this. We've asked our questions, but this is the opportunity for our representatives to present this information publicly. And then at our follow-up board meeting, the Board of Education would be considering a resolution to adopt the audit. So, Josh, did you want to say anything else before we begin?
No, I just want to thank Kathy Lynch for the hard work that she did with our audit team. There was a lot of hard work over weeks and weeks and weeks to get everything together. And thanks to the team at O'Connor Davies for getting everything together by this point, knowing that a lot of the materials were coming in as late as 2-3 days ago from other sources. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. You're gonna work? You'll, oh. You wanna work it? You work. Okay. So thank you. We'll try to get through this in about 10 minutes for those who are following along. So I'm Scott Oling. I'm a partner with the firm of PKF O'Connor Davies, and I'm joined tonight by Claudia Legal, who is manager, who actually ran the day-to-day operations of the audit. And we will tag team on going through this presentation. What we're going to go over tonight is the timeline that the audit ran. We'll go over some required communications as your auditor that we are required to provide to you. And then we will focus most of it on where the financial results were for the district for the year ended June 30, 24. We'll go over some minor nitpicky comments that we came up with, and then we will wrap it up and be available for any questions. So I'll have Claudia start us with the timeline.
Oh, sorry about that. Our post-audit meeting is today, and then we hope to release our audit report later this week and early next week.
Can you just speak into the mic,
Oh,
because
sorry.
it's not really for us, it's more for the recording.
Got it,
Thank you.
sorry. And then these are our responsibilities as auditors under the auditing standards accepted in the United States of America. So we form and express an opinion on the financial statements. We obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from any material misstatements. We maintain professional skepticism. We conduct the audit in accordance with US GAAP. And we are glad to note there were no material errors, no fraudulent financial reporting, or any misappropriation of assets. And there were also no instances, suspicions, or allegations of fraud noted during our audit. And then management's responsibility is to design, implement, and maintain internal controls. And once again, no material weaknesses were noted. Management is also responsible to comply with laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements. And accounting estimates made by management are to be reasonable. And once again, there were no significant audit adjustments made during our audit. And then there were no disagreements with management noted, no unresolved difficulties encountered when performing the audit. There was no consultation by other accountants by management, no irregularities or illegal acts noted, and we as a firm are independent with respect to the school district and in accordance with our professional standards.
Okay, so now we get to the good stuff, which are the numbers, the financial results for the district for the year that ended June 30, 2024. More detailed information on this will be available in the full audit report when it's issued. So this is a very high-level summary of the results this year. So the top part of the chart shows the revenues for the district. And as a school district located in Westchester County, much like other districts in the county, the primary revenue sources comes from the levy of property taxes, with a small amount coming from state aid and other sources. So what you could see here is that the budget originally anticipated revenues from those sources of about $134.8 million. And in the third column, the actual results of operations came in at just under $138 million. Or as you could see in the variance column, revenues came in about $3.1 million better than planned. We've seen that at a lot of districts this summer. The primary driver of some of this is, the state aid formulas, particularly foundation aid, were fully funded by the state for the first time in God knows how long. And also Interest earnings were very high for everybody this year because of the, the higher interest rate environment, which now, as of this week, is going to begin to start going the other way, based on the Federal Reserve's actions. But overall, revenues came in about 3 million better than you planned. In the middle of the page is what you spend those resources on. A general support category are the administrative costs of the district, buildings and grounds, business office, superintendent's office, those kinds of things. Obviously, the main cost is in the instructional area, which are, all the teacher salaries, guidance counselors, principals, pens, pencils, smart boards, everything related to the instruction program. Budget amount for transportation costs to operate the buses that you just got finished talking about here. And then employee benefits, obviously a very big cost, all the benefits that you provide to your employees contractually or legally, pension costs, health costs, social security payments, and so forth. And then you have debt service costs, principal and interest on previously borrowed monies by the district that you are paying back to the bondholders. So overall, the original budget for these expenses were about 136.5 million. Budget got revised during the year slightly to an estimate of 137.5 million, but you can see the actual results. You only spent 133.9 million. So you did underspend the budget. You had savings of about $3.5 million. Within that number are certain things called purchase orders that carry over to the next year, which are about 800,000 of that number. So you really underspent the budget by about $2.8 million. So when you get to the bottom of the page, you see in the first column a negative $4.1 million. So when this budget was adopted, you actually intended to spend more than you were going to take in revenues. But because you had previously accumulated savings called fund balance, that's how you balanced your spending plan. You said, we'll take money from our savings account and make our spending plan work. In the final budget column during the year, the budget was modified slightly, and the plan was to use 5.1 million in fund balance. So if everything came in according to the final budget plan, your fund balance would have actually declined by $5.1 million. But the good news for the district is based on the actual results where revenues came in better than you expected, and you managed your spending and spent less than you had anticipated spending, not only did you not dip into fund balance, but you actually, as you could see, the third number up in the actual column, you actually added 1.6 million to your fund balance. Your fund balance, which is, you can call it your savings account, started the year with $17.8 million, and it ended the year adding the 1.6 million to bring it to a total of 19.4 million. On the next page, this is what we call a balance sheet or a snapshot of the district at one point in time on June 30th. And the fund balance is the second number up from the bottom. And fund balance is the difference between your assets and liabilities. At the top of the page, the district had assets at June 30th of $30.9 million, primarily in cash and investments and certain amounts due from New York State and so forth. So you had 30.9 million in assets. Under that, you also had liabilities, things that you owed of about $11.5 million, mostly to the pension systems, the teachers' retirement system and the employees' retirement system. The net difference between the assets and liabilities is that $19 million fund balance. But the fund balance, as you could see, is broken down and subtotaled into many components here. The first portion of it is what we call non-spendable, 764,000, which matches the prepaid number up top. You prepay the health insurance a month in advance, but that expense really relates to July, not June. But because the cash went out in June, a portion of fund balance is what it is, non-spendable. You can't spend it because you already spent the cash. The biggest portion of your fund balance that really represents almost half of your fund balance is what we call restricted. And that total is 9.5 million. Restricted fund balance is restricted either under general municipal law or education law, but none of these restrictions can be established without board approval. So the business office can't just do whatever they want in here. These all result from a board action over time. So there's money set aside to deal with tax certiorari claims, refunds from businesses or homeowners who grieve the assessed value on their property. So you have 2.1 million in that pot, which can only be used for that, and money can only be taken out of these also by board resolution. There's an employee benefit accrued liability restriction of 2.5 million. That really is there to cover vacation sick time that would be owed to employees of the district. You have money, 2.1 million set aside for the employees' retirement system contribution in case retirement rates, spike up. Rather than having to tax folks for an increase like that, you can tap this reserve to help, cushion, any types of increases in retirement contributions. Then there's some money set aside for future capital projects separate from your bonding project that was approved by the voters. There's money set aside for debt service of 1.2 million. That comes from interest earned on borrowed money and can only be used to repay the outstanding debt that the district has. And then a few other reserves combined that total about 500,000. So 9.5 million, about half your fund balance, is restricted for those specific purposes. Then you have assigned fund balance, which include encumbrances, which are these purchase orders that weren't completed by the end of the fiscal year, that roll over, increase the budget in the year you're in so you could finish paying those bills. And then you gave back in property tax relief $2.7 million. So when you ask the voters to approve your 24-25 budget that you're in now, when you presented them the spending plan and the revenue plan, the expenditure plan, the spending was anticipated to be 2.7 million greater than the revenues that you were going to bring in. So you said, hey, we have money in our savings account. Rather than raising taxes another 2.7 million or cutting spending 2.7 million, this is what you did. And obviously the voters approved your 24-25 spending plan. So then what's really left out of the 19 million fund balance or savings account is what's called unassigned, 5.6 million. That's the free and clear amount. Under New York state law, school districts not allowed to have more than 4% of their budget in unassigned fund balance. And I can say that this district with 5.6 million is at 3.98%. So you are essentially at the max that you are allowed to have in that fund. So overall, a very good financial picture for the district for the end of this fiscal year. And Claudia will wrap up with just a couple more items.
So next we'll get to the management letter comments, and these three comments are control deficiencies, which is our lowest level of finding. Material weakness is the highest level, significant deficiency, and then control deficiency. So these three are the lowest level of findings that we noted. The first is the special purpose fund. This is where the scholarships are accounted for, the extra classroom club activities. And we noted there were 8 scholarships that had no activity during the year. So we just recommend that the school district evaluate whether these scholarships are still active and to either move these funds to the general fund or to move them to another scholarship. Next is the special aid fund. There were receivable balances over 1 year from the New York State related to the summer handicap program, totaling approximately $238,000. And these receivables take a long time from the state to pay out. We just recommend that the district monitor their collection of these receivables, and if determined that they will no longer be receiving money, to either write them off and obtain a board resolution to do so. And next is the cash receipts. We noted there was no formal procedure for documenting the date that cash was received. And without documentation, we can't verify the timeliness of the deposit, and we generally recommend that all cash be deposited within 72 hours of receipt.
So with that, just to wrap it up, really the first 2 bullet points are very good things for the school district. As your auditor, we want to issue what's known as unmodified or clean opinions. It means that we believe your financial statements fairly present what happened. You don't want a not clean opinion. So we are issuing a clean opinion on both your financial statements, the numbers we just went through, but also this year the district expended $1.6 million in federal funds. And when a district or any municipal entity spends over $750,000 a year in federal dollars, it requires a separate compliance audit that you are following the federal regulations related to those programs. So because the district spent 1.6 million, we had to do this compliance audit. And we've issued a clean opinion on the programs that we looked at that we, said that you complied, with the requirements of the federal government. And as part of the audit, now that we are wrapping it up and we'll be issuing the report final in the next 24 to 48 hours, that your audit report will be uploaded to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. And information is in there that tells the feds what federal programs you got, what you spent in those programs, and were there any findings. So within that portal, we've indicated there were no findings. Once we upload all this stuff, I certify it as the auditor. Josh will then certify it as the auditee, and then the feds will, accept it at that point. Of course, they can do, they could require a separate audit, if they so choose, which they never do because they don't have any money. So these are really good things. And again, as Claudia said earlier, the important thing is the findings that we had were no material weaknesses, very, very, minimal, scraping the bottom of the barrel to find something to write up. Obviously, the school district has a very good Moody's rating. Currently, you are in the early stages of a very large capital project that you've done what we call temporary financing on in the form of what's called bond anticipation notes. And eventually somewhere within the next year, and at this point you have about $23 million in borrowings on bond anticipation notes. Within the next year, you're going to convert those bond anticipation notes to serial bonds, general obligation bonds that investors, will buy, and you're going to be using that money towards your $33 million voter approved project. So having a strong credit rating will of course lower the interest cost that you will pay on that $33 million borrowing. So that's very good. And another important thing is, as I indicated on one of the other slides, you used about $3.5 million to balance this year's budget, the 23-24. In 24-25, you reduced that reliance to $2.7 million. So you actually brought your operating budget more into like true balance, where the money you take in and the money you plan to spend are equal. It's certainly much easier to manage that than if you're trying to basically use up all your savings to balance a budget. Because if you don't replenish it and you dry up your savings, then you're going to have some very hard decisions to make going forward. So that is also a really good sign. So with that, that's the end of our official presentation, and we'd be glad to take any comments or questions.
Well, and as Dr. Ackerman said, we all had a chance to ask questions before this at our committee meeting, but I'll just take a quick glance to see if if there was anything left unasked that folks wanted to bring up. Okay, good.
Thank you
Chris.
very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.
Are you done?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, next up is committee reports. Does anyone from the board have a committee report? Alyssa?
I don't have a committee report, but I do have a CSF liaison report.
Okay, good.
So CSF had their first meeting of the year on September 16th, where they introduced everyone and all their new membership and just talked about the first event of the year, which was the Magic with Evan. The magician that came to the Chappaqua Library was one of their fundraising events, and that it was really strong, and they had a really great time, and the community seemed to really love it. It was a fundraising event that people could donate a certain amount, but you didn't have to buy a ticket. So it was really nice because anyone in the community could come and then give what they felt like they wanted to give. So it was a nice way to everyone could feel welcome, but also raise some money for CSF. And then last night was Mom's Night Out. The moms on the side of the table all went, and Dr. Ackerman went as well. The dads were not invited, unfortunately. So But it was at Le Jardin and it was a lovely evening.
Matt and I are going to do a different dad's night out.
I think they're gonna do something just for dads, and both of you can go. But it was a really great night, and it was nice to be outside with everyone, and just enjoying was probably one of the last few evenings we could be outside for an outdoor event. But CSS has a lot of great things planned for the year, and we're really excited about it. That's it.
Hillary.
I also have a quasi-committee report. As I kind of mentioned earlier, I'm the liaison, the advocacy liaison for the board to West Putt and NISBA. So I went to the West Putt, which is the Westchester Putnam School Boards Association meeting, which was the pre-meeting for the NISBA, which is the New York State School Boards Association, meeting on their proposed advocacy resolutions for this year. So West Putt every year does a pre-meeting where we talk about sort of regionally what are our priorities. So we got to talk to neighboring districts in the area about what our thoughts were on NISBA's proposed resolutions, and I think we're going to be discussing that in more detail at our meeting on the 8th. 9th. Because then on the 10th is the meeting where we go and vote on the NISBA. So I'm going to go to that online on behalf of the board, but they're mostly pretty straightforward this year, but we'll talk about that in October.
Matt or Kaylee? No? Okay. That brings us to public comment. We welcome public comment, and in respect for each other's time, we ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Board members may be contacted via email or phone. After the public comment period has been completed, board members may have a discussion amongst themselves regarding comments presented. Are there any public comments? Going once, going twice. Okay. Hearing none, we will then move on to approvals and ratifications. The first set are accepting the minutes for our September 10th meeting and our September 18th work session. 3.1, and can I have a motion for 3.1 and 3.2, please?
I'll move.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
I recommend 4.1 instructional as presented.
I'll move that we accept the superintendent's recommendation for 4.1. Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
I recommend 4.2 non-instructional as presented.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. That moves us to the consent agenda. The consent agenda permits the Board of Education to make more effective use of its time by adopting a single motion to cover relatively routine matters which are included. Any member of the board who wishes to discuss individually a particular piece of business on the consent agenda may so indicate, and that item will be considered and voted on separately, preserving the right of all board members to be heard on any issue. It's recommended the Board of Education approve the following consent agenda as submitted by the Superintendent of Schools. Items 5.1 through 5.16. Does anyone want to remove anything tonight? Okay. So I will move 5.1 through 5.16. Can I have a second?
Second.
And just so folks know, just in summary, there's some special ed contracts on here. There's painting, pest control, charter bus, and the school resource officer that we heard about as examples. All those in favor? Aye. Nothing for 6 or 7 tonight, so we're now at 8. 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3, we're acknowledging receipt of the Treasurer's Report for August 2024, the Appropriation Status Report for August 24, and the Revenue Status Report for August 2024. Can I have a motion for 8.1 through 8.3?
Motion.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? That moves us to notice of future meetings. We'll be together next Wednesday, October 9th, right here, 7 o'clock for the district performance report. Did we forget something?
Well, I thought, I just want to, we started early because I thought these two presentations would last a lot longer, so we're ending really early. So I just want to acknowledge that I misjudged the length of time we'd be discussing the buses. So I apologize.
Early bedtime for me is not bad.
I just want to say that my timing was off. I thought those would take a lot longer, so.
That's all right. So yeah, we'll be together again here on the 9th, and then again on the 23rd. The 23rd, we'll have a literacy program update. And so I think we're ready to adjourn. It's 7:15. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor? Okay, thank you very much, everybody.